My ex-wife cheated on me 15 years ago, and now she's sick and needs money, but I refuse to help her, and now my children have turned against me. Because of that, I had to cut them out of my life. I don't know why I'm writing this, maybe to vent or to try to make sense of what's happened. I'm not expecting much sympathy, especially because family situations like mine tend to divide opinions, but I think sharing this here might help me deal with my anger and frustration. I'm a 52-year-old man. I divorced my ex-wife 15 years ago after discovering she had been cheating on me for 2 years with her friend. We have 3 children together. For privacy reasons, I'll call them Sarah, who's 26, Jake, who's 23, and Emily, who's 21. It was devastating when I found out about the affair. I had always taken pride in being a good husband and father. I wasn't perfect in any way. We were financially tight, but I was dedicated to my family. My ex-wife was a stay-at-home mom raising our 3 kids while I worked 2 jobs to support us. I thought it was a fair arrangement for both of us, but sadly, she didn't see it that way. She complained that I didn't spend enough time with them and that I didn't earn enough money. I carried this guilt for many years, feeling inadequate in both aspects, until I realized that at the time I was in my late 20s and early 30s, and supporting a family of 5 wasn't easy. In reality, I was doing well. Given my modest background, I didn't come from a wealthy family, and everything we had was the result of my hard work. Our marriage cooled off, and one day I caught her cheating on me with her friend. I ended the relationship. The infidelity didn't just hurt me. I felt she had betrayed the life we had built together. It wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment or a mistake, it was 2 years of a secret life she had with her friend. It's hard to describe the emotional, financial, and psychological impact of discovering that your partner has been unfaithful for so long. It's like the entire world crumbles around you. After finding out, I confronted her. She admitted it but was more defensive than remorseful, as if somehow I had driven her to do it. It was like I no longer recognized the woman I had married. There was no attempt at reconciliation, no therapy, nothing. I filed for divorce almost immediately, and surprisingly, she didn't contest it. I think she was too caught up in the fantasy of her life with her lover to care. That dream didn't last long. About 6 months later, her lover left her, leaving her alone and in many ways broken. She tried to come back to me, but by then, I was emotionally disconnected. She had destroyed my trust, and there was no way I could go back. I focused on co-parenting our children and trying to rebuild my life after the divorce. I made an effort to stay involved in my children's lives. I loved them and didn't want the divorce to ruin their relationship with either parent. We had joint custody, and I paid child support until they were old enough to support themselves. I also contributed to their college tuition, took them on vacations, and supported them in every way I could. They stayed with me on weekends and holidays, and I felt we had a decent shared custody arrangement. The kids and I became close, and despite my bitterness toward their mother, I hoped that at least they wouldn't have to bear the burden of the divorce. About 5 years after the divorce, I met my current wife. She's amazing, kind, supportive, and a fantastic mother. We have 2 children together who are in elementary school. My marriage has been stable and happy. Of course, balancing the new family with my responsibilities to my older children was difficult at times, but I thought I was handling it as best as I could. Life went on, but now everything is coming to a point I never imagined. My ex remained single. She dated a few people, but nothing serious, from what I heard from the kids. However, about a year ago, she suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital. Since then, she hasn't been well, but I didn't pay much attention. We didn't have communication outside of matters related to the kids, and that became less frequent when they reached their late teens and early 20s. She was diagnosed with a heart condition, but it wasn't severe. She was discharged within a week and given medication. Then, earlier this year, everything changed. I received a call from my eldest daughter, Sarah, telling me that my ex-wife had been hospitalized after suffering a stroke. She was left paralyzed from the waist down, and they weren't sure if she would ever fully recover. I felt sorry for my kids. After all, she was their mother. I visited her with my current wife, and honestly, she looked miserable. When I found out about her infidelity, I cursed her, but I never wanted her to suffer so much. I prayed for her recovery for the kids' sake. Sarah told me they needed help, financial help, specifically. Apparently, my ex-wife's medical bills were piling up, and she couldn't cover them with her insurance or savings. Immediately, I wrote a check for a considerable amount that covered a large portion of her immediate medical bills. Fortunately, she was recovering quickly, was soon discharged from the hospital, and began physical therapy to help her regain muscle strength. However, she was still far from living a normal life. She needed someone to help her with daily routines, things as basic as taking her to the bathroom or giving her a shower. For the first 3 or 4 months, the kids took turns caring for their mother, but now they're overwhelmed. They have their own lives, jobs, and responsibilities. Sarah, the oldest, got married last year. And because of her mother's condition, she hasn't been able to dedicate time to her marriage. Jake just started his career and needs to focus on his work, but can barely meet the minimum to keep his job. The youngest, Emily, graduated a few months ago but hasn't been able to get a full-time job due to this responsibility. She's doing part-time jobs just to get by. My ex-wife doesn't have the money to hire a full-time nurse, and the kids don't have enough money to contribute and pay for a nurse for their mother. Her situation is genuine, I recognize that. I empathize with them, but what am I supposed to do? I've lent large sums of money on 3 occasions since she became paralyzed. Now I have my own family to worry about. 2 children in school who will depend on me for the next 10 years, a wife, and our own financial responsibilities. Despite this, I told them I would contribute financially whenever I could, but that I couldn't commit to a specific amount. My kids aren't happy with this. They want me to take full responsibility for my ex-wife since she's their mother. I refused, and now they're all a little angry with me. They've stopped answering my calls and texts, and they respond sarcastically when I post something on social media with my wife and kids. I've tried to be empathetic with them since they are going through tough times, taking care of their mother while trying to manage their own responsibilities. But it seems they have no empathy for my situation and feel entitled to my money. I endured the bitter comments for as long as I could, but yesterday I had enough and exploded at Jake, who called me complaining about the situation and blaming me for not taking enough responsibility. I told him, I've already fulfilled my obligations. I raised them, supported them financially, paid for their education, and met all my legal and moral obligations as a father, but their mother didn't. We've been divorced for 15 years. I'm no longer responsible for her. She had her chance, made her choices, and must face the consequences of those choices. That's how I see it. He hung up without saying anything. Now I feel overwhelmed. While I understand their dilemma, I'm also not in a position to completely cover my ex-wife's expenses. Do you think I'm being cruel for prioritizing my current family over my ex-wife? Edit. I think I need to clarify this because I didn't mention it in my post, but my children do know that my wife cheated on me. They haven't taken sides, nor did I try to make them because that was a problem between my ex-wife and me, and the kids shouldn't have been involved in it. They know because we've talked about it when they've asked, but I never tried to use it as a tool to make them hate their mother. Update 1. I thought my firmness had put an end to the discussion, but that wasn't the case. Let me tell you, no one can act more entitled than your own children, and the funny thing is, they think they can get away with it because you brought them into the world. Before moving on to the update, let me answer a common question I received in my last post. What does my ex-wife think about all this? Well, guys, I don't know. I have no contact with her. I visited her twice when she was in the hospital, and I did so with my wife. At that time, she wasn't in a condition to speak. All the information I have is through my children. Also, I don't care to ask them what their mother wants from me. It's pointless. I hope I've made myself clearer. Now, about the update. After the argument with Jake, he gathered his sisters and they came to my house. I wasn't resentful about our conversation, but they had other demands for me. They started with a complaint session about how hard it was for them to manage their finances, take care of their sick mother, etc. I immediately understood where it was all headed, but I was wrong. Their demands exceeded my imagination. I didn't want to interrupt or be rude, so I let them continue. After they finished, I politely told them I had many responsibilities to attend to, and in the midst of all this, I couldn't commit to providing more financial help. Emily stepped in and said, "Dad, you know the 3 of us have paused our lives to take care of our mother, but this is becoming too much for us. We expect you to become her primary caregiver." I froze and asked, "What do you mean by primary caregiver?" Sarah stepped in to say, "Dad, now that you're financially stable and work only one job, you could share our burden on weekends and evenings to take care of Mom so the 3 of us can have some time to prioritize our own lives." I lost my mind, but I didn't raise my voice. I just stared at them, stunned. How could they suggest such a thing? That I leave my wife and children to take care of their mother in my spare time? I explained to them that while I empathized with their mother's situation, she was no longer my responsibility. We had been divorced for over 15 years, and I had moved on with my life. I told them they could help their mother if they wished, but I wasn't going to get involved beyond the help I had already provided. Sarah started to cry, and Emily hugged her. They were upset because I wasn't willing to do more. If the expectation that I would take financial responsibility for my ex-wife wasn't enough, they even wanted me to become her primary caregiver. How absurd. Don't they realize I have a full-time job, a wife, and 2 young children? I tried reasoning with them, but their argument was that they didn't have the time or resources to take care of their mother. So they expected me to take on that responsibility. In their minds, I was still responsible because I was once married to her. I felt like they were trying to dump their mother on me. I sat there, feeling defeated, in a tense silence, waiting for them to realize how absurd they sounded. Jake broke the silence and said, "Come on, man, you can't evade your responsibilities. After all, she's your wife." I corrected him immediately, "Ex-wife, who destroyed our marriage." I wanted to say more but stopped there. I didn't want to sound vengeful, or as if I wasn't helping out of spite. They didn't take it well. In fact, the three of them united against me, accusing me of abandoning their mother. They said I was being insensitive and selfish for choosing my new family over them. The argument kept going in circles without reaching any conclusion. I was tired of explaining, but it was like talking to a wall. Things escalated when my current wife found out what was happening. She has always been incredibly understanding about me lending a few $1,000s to my ex-wife from time to time, due to her miserable situation. My wife usually stays out of any disputes between my children and me, but when she realized that they were basically trying to force me to care for my ex-wife, she stepped in. She asked, "What's going on? Why haven't we reached a conclusion after hours of discussion?" I know she heard everything. She was in her room the whole time, which is right next to the living room where we were talking. That question was her way of asking for approval to get involved in the situation. I looked at her with pleading eyes and briefly explained that the kids were overwhelmed with responsibilities and wanted me to be the primary caregiver. She smiled, empathized with them, and firmly said, "We understand, guys, but your dad has already done his part for you and your mom. Now he has other obligations to us and my kids. You are adults, and we expect you to have the maturity to understand your situation." Those weren't her exact words, but that's essentially what she said. My kids got furious and asked her to stay out of the matter. Before I could respond, my wife immediately replied, "I have every right to be involved because every cent that he gives to your mother comes out of my household. We could have enrolled our kids in swimming lessons with that money. We could have funded their summer camp. We could have done many useful things, but I allowed him to give that money purely out of humanity. But now I see that you are emotionally and financially exploiting him, and I need to support him." They didn't like that at all and accused her of manipulating me and turning me against them. Emily said that she was the reason I wasn't willing to help. I was shocked at how cruel they were to her. This is a woman who has done nothing but support me and be a wonderful stepmother to them. Yet they attacked her like she was the evil stepmother from a fairy tale. That was the final straw. I told all three of them that I was not going to tolerate any disrespect toward my wife. I drew a line. I told them that if they couldn't be civil and stop trying to blame me for not taking care of their mother, then I would have no choice but to cut all ties with them. At first, they didn't believe me, but when they continued attacking my wife and me, I followed through with my word. I asked them to leave my house immediately. I have no room for people who disrespect my wife. It was shocking for them that I could do such a thing because up until now, I had always shown them love. But I cut off all three of them. I'm not going to lie. Cutting ties with my children was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I love them and always will, but I couldn't stand by and allow them to attack my wife and make me feel guilty. They can't force me into a situation I don't want to be in. It hurt, but I felt I had no other choice. It's been a few days since I cut ties, and the silence is painful. I've been questioning myself constantly, wondering if I made the right decision, if there was a better way to handle things. But every time I replay the events in my mind, I come to the same conclusion. I did what I had to do to protect my current family and my own mental health. I don't know if my kids will change their minds one day. I hope they do. I hope one day they can see things from my perspective, but I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm focusing on my wife and my young children. They need me, and I need them. Update 2. My kids reached out to me, but not to mend things, rather, to keep exploiting me. That's right. I hadn't had any contact with the three of them after our last argument. 3 months later, Sarah sent me a message for my birthday. I responded with an emoji. Since then, she's been texting me from time to time to check on how I'm doing. At first, I ignored several of her messages, then she apologized for being rude to my wife. I didn't respond to that topic, but after that, I began to reply to her occasionally. She also hasn't mentioned anything about her mother, and I don't ask. I only send brief responses. My wife knows about it and has no problem with it. Plus, Sarah is the most emotional and loving of the three, and she didn't say anything bad to my wife. It was mainly Jake and Emily, but Sarah didn't stop them and supported them, so I also had to distance myself from her. A week ago, she messaged me asking for a meeting, not alone, but with Jake and Emily. I told her they first needed to apologize to my wife in order for me to let them back into my life. She agreed. My wife suggested we meet in a public place, so if there was any drama, we could simply leave. Hosting the meeting at home gets complicated when it's time to ask them to leave. It made sense, so we arranged the meeting at a restaurant. The three of them arrived and apologized to my wife, and things seemed normal. They told us what was going on in their lives without mentioning anything about their mother. After a while, I noticed Emily signaling Sarah with her eyes. Sarah ignored her, and so did I. Then a few minutes later, Jake nudged Sarah. It was so obvious that both my wife and I noticed. My wife cleverly asked, "What's going on?" And the atmosphere became uncomfortable. Sarah hesitated to speak, but Emily, being the most direct, started talking. Let me loosely quote what she said. "Dad, we were hoping to get some financial help from you. We understand that it was too much to ask you to be the caregiver. That was our mistake, but financially, we think you can contribute. We can no longer put our lives on hold to take care of Mom. We need a full-time nurse, and we really can't afford one. We wanted you to take care of the nurse's expenses." She kept talking, describing how the three of them were struggling to support their mother, but in my head, I was connecting the dots. You see, since I cut all ties with them, I hadn't paid a single cent for their mother. Now they realized that by demanding my time, they also cut off the financial resources. So their apology meant nothing. It was just a front to manipulate me and get money. I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't lend you any more money. I'm not a billionaire who can support so many people with my own two hands. I have a regular job and many responsibilities to take care of. I'm still paying off the loans Jake and Emily took for their college tuition." Jake snapped, saying, "If you're not giving your time to take care of our mother, you should at least be paying for the nurse's expenses." At that moment, I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to leave the discussion unresolved. I reiterated my stance, and an argument broke out between Jake and me. Sarah tried to mediate the situation. She calmly said, "But Dad, you committed to helping financially, and you used to lend us money before our last meeting. What's changed now?" I responded in the same calm tone. "Sweetheart, first, I never committed. In fact, I said I couldn't commit, but that I would contribute when possible. Now, I don't think it's a viable option for me. You can't feel entitled to receive money, right?" Everyone fell silent and became bitter. I repeated once more that my obligations towards their mother had ended, and now I needed to take care of my new family. Nobody said anything. I asked for the bill, paid, and we left. They didn't even say goodbye to us. They just sat there, looking at their phones. My wife and I were quiet during the drive home. We both knew I had made the right decision. It hurts to see my children in this situation, and it's understandable what they're going through. Nobody wants to see their parents suffer, but I can't help anymore. Update 3. I've been doing a lot of reflecting in the past few days, partly thanks to the comments I've received. Many people have pointed out something that's been lingering in my mind for a while. I've spoiled my kids too much, and maybe that's why they behave this way. It's not easy to admit, but after analyzing things, I think they're right. One of the clearest examples is that I took on Jake and Emily's student loans, something that clearly should have been their responsibility. At the end of the day, they are already adults, and I've taken on burdens that I probably shouldn't have, which has contributed to this dynamic where they feel entitled to more than I can offer. So, I've made a decision. I'm not going to continue paying those student loans. I know this probably won't sit well with my kids, but I think it's time for them to learn how to fend for themselves. I don't have the patience or energy to keep dealing with their demands, especially now, when it seems like any boundary I try to set is taken as a personal offense. At the end of the day, what's the worst that could happen? That they never speak to me again? Well, that's already happening. We barely have any communication, aside from a few messages from Sarah, and I honestly don't know if that's going to change. But I no longer want to keep financially supporting them while they attack me for not being the ideal father they expect me to be. Soon, I'll call Jake and Emily to inform them of my decision, that they will have to pay their own loans from now on. I don't anticipate a positive reaction, but that's something I'm willing to deal with. They can't expect me to always be there to solve all their problems, especially when their way of treating me has been more than unfair. On the other hand, I think this is a good time to address something I haven't clarified until now, the relationship my kids have with their mother, and how they view the infidelity that destroyed our marriage. When everything came to light, they were upset with her, as expected. At first, they even seemed to be on my side in all of this, especially Sarah, who was the most emotionally affected by the situation. However, over time, they managed to forgive her. Somehow, they've made peace with what happened and have continued seeing her as their mother, which, to be honest, I completely understand. It was never my intention to use my ex-wife's infidelity to turn my children against her, so it was their decision whether to forgive her or not. Update 4. Recently, I spoke with Emily and Jake about my decision to stop paying their student loans. As I expected, the conversation wasn't easy. I made it clear that I would no longer be taking care of their debts, and that if they wanted to have a genuine relationship with me, they were free to do so. But I also told them that if they weren't interested in that, it was fine. At the end of the day, if they were going to cut ties with me for this reason, it would only show that they saw me as a father solely for the money, not for the relationship we could have. Emily took it a little better than Jake, although not by much. At least she didn't hang up the call, but she begged me not to stop helping her because she didn't have the means to cover such a large debt. While I understand that, I stayed firm in my decision. I know it's hard for them, but I can no longer keep covering their financial responsibilities. Jake, on the other hand, didn't take it well at all. He yelled at me, clearly upset, and then hung up in a fit of rage. I wasn't surprised by his reaction, but it's still painful to see how they react when I try to set boundaries. I don't expect either of them to reach out to me anytime soon, but if this is the path we must walk now, I've made my peace with it. My life has changed, and I can no longer be that father who always solves everything with money. Update 5. After almost a year with no updates on this front, I decided to make this post to commemorate a sort of anniversary of the situation. For starters, I haven't had contact with Emily or Jake since our last conversation. With Emily, the reason is clear. She knows I'm not going to help her with her student loan and, therefore, hasn't bothered to contact me to try and convince me. I think she fully understands that I won't change my mind. Jake, on the other hand, also knows this, but he's been bad-mouthing me behind my back. From what I've heard, he's the one who holds the most resentment and bitterness towards me. With Sarah, things have been somewhat different. We've spoken a few times, but our relationship remains quite distant. She's the only one who tells me a little about what's going on with her siblings, though not too much, since our communication is more cordial than personal or deep. As for my ex-wife, I found out through Sarah that they finally decided to put her in a nursing home. It seems to be the cheapest and most convenient option for everyone, since neither of them wants to fully take on the responsibility of caring for her, nor do they have the money to pay someone to do it at home. It's a practical solution, although, to be honest, it's quite sad for her. This isn't an update that makes me particularly happy. It's not like my children have finally seen things from my perspective or apologized to me. There has been no reconciliation or understanding. Things are just the way they are. I accept that this is the path our lives have taken,